Story 1. Back in the late 1990s, so pre-September 11th, I was going through security at LaGuardia Airport in New York. There was a family ahead of me sending their bags through the X-ray machine when everything stopped. They pulled a bag, opened it up, and pulled out a large butcher knife. The mother turned to her son, who was 11 or 12, and screamed, "Why did you put that in your bag? That is one of my good knives. I paid $80 for those knives." All the child could do was shrug his shoulders and say, "I don't know. I thought I might need it." They confiscated the knife, much to the mother's dismay, and let them go on their way. Story 2. A grown man with a beard wearing a pink tutu and white patent leather pumps, pulling a Hello Kitty suitcase. Omaha. Story 3. Not that weird, but I once had my luggage destroyed, and they just crammed all my stuff in a huge garbage bag. So I had to walk through the airport with a garbage bag over my shoulder like some sort of hobo Santa. Story 4. Two soldiers are walking by working as security. Both are armed with handguns, and one is holding an M16 rifle. They pass by my seat in the terminal. Some time passes and they walk back. Only this time the other soldier is holding the rifle. I guess that weapon is heavy. Story 5. Guy was giving himself a full shower in the bathroom sink. He had his shirt off, shaving cream and razor out, and was also shampooing his hair. Don't get me wrong, a guy has to do what a guy has to do, but it was definitely a weird sight to walk into. I also saw a girl let her dog relieve itself in the middle of a walkway and didn't even think twice about walking away without cleaning it up. That was really nasty. Story 6. Stranded at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport now, and it is so cold inside the terminal you can see your breath. I also watched a man knock over an elderly lady because he was running and fell, scattering her belongings everywhere. He got up and didn't apologize, just ran. Story 7. I enjoyed the sign at Vientiane Airport in Laos, which mentioned that possession of illegal drugs is punishable by mandatory death penalty. Story 8. At Miami Airport, a man who had just undergone a hair transplant gained media attention due to complaints about blood seeping from his bandages. It was quite alarming. Story 9. It is not unusual, but rather a culture shock when you fly around the world. Outside the United States, there are many more patrolling police officers with fully automatic weapons visible. It may seem strange, considering how gun-friendly the United States is, but for some reason, law enforcement is far less visible in areas of major public transportation. Story 10. I was on a flight with a group of professional wrestlers once. They were all dressed in casual wrestler attire, sunglasses, leather jackets, and acid-wash jeans. It was quite strange. They were enormous. Story 11. Way back, I was young, naive, and most gay individuals were still in the closet. I watched a Canadian Green Beret, which was a rarity in itself, passionately kiss his boyfriend before heading back to active duty in Vietnam. Hare Krishna recruiters were also a feature at airports during that time. Story 12. The Hare Krishnas were dancing around in the terminal, handing out daisies in the 60s. I was a kid and it was a trip. Story 13. I was in Houston Airport walking toward the water refill station, and a janitor was trying to communicate with a traveler who couldn't speak English. The traveler was gesturing, and the janitor assumed he wanted water, so he pointed to the refill station. The traveler cut me off, stood in front of the water station, and started unbuckling his belt. I was too shocked to really do anything, but thankfully, the janitor immediately realized what was happening and ran back over, yelling, "Stop! Stop!" He ushered the man toward the bathroom, shaking his head all the while. It was a close call. Thank goodness I didn't have to witness someone causing a scene at the water station that day, but it was still strange. Story 14. Last year, I saw a man get his suitcase checked, and it was full of mini Baby Bell cheeses. There were other cheeses as well, but he had a considerable amount of those Baby Bell cheeses. Story 15. I was returning from Afghanistan and had an M4 and an M9 on me, so did a lot of us. Our chartered flight landed in Baltimore, and we all split up to go on different civilian flights back towards our bases. A few of us flying to Seattle, Fort Lewis, had a long layover, so we went outside to smoke cigarettes with plenty of time. Coming back in, I went through security with no issue, then heard screaming behind me. It turns out my buddy got stopped by the Transportation Security Administration agent for having nail clippers in his pocket, and he created a whole scene about it. I don't know why he was carrying nail clippers in his pocket, and I can guess he was stressed out from just coming home from war, but we spent a significant amount of time calming him down so he wouldn't get arrested. Still, we were all just like, "Ma'am, we're literally holding multiple guns each, and you're stopping us for nail clippers." The Transportation Security Administration lady kept asking if we had paperwork for the knife, since we had paperwork for the guns. A supervisor came over and told him he had to forfeit his nail clippers to go through. My buddy literally had tears in his eyes, but he did it. We offered to buy him a manicure on the way to Fort Lewis, and that finally cracked a smile on him. The whole thing was just strange. Story 16. A man who appeared to be somewhat disheveled started stretching on the floor of a Delta Sky Club, and somehow during the process, he lost his clothes. He was arrested. I also witnessed a middle-aged man in a suit urinating at a urinal with his pants completely down. Story 17. I got off a plane around midnight. The airport was busy for that time of night. I got my belongings, headed to the shuttle bus area, and there was a fire truck with a couple of firefighters standing by a car with a woman inside. The hood was on fire. I had to stop and watch from a safe distance. After the fire worsened, the woman got out of the car, and finally, after a bit longer, the entire front end caught fire. Only then did the firefighters put out the fire, which they did quickly. I never understood why they weren't getting her out of the car immediately and why they waited to extinguish the fire. Story 18. Traveling in 2021 from Frankfurt to the United States, I was on standby. I was waiting while boarding was going on to see if there was a seat available. I was standing near the desk when a man's ticket beeped, and the red light went on. The agent told him to go to the desk. The agent took his boarding pass and entered it into the computer, saying, "Sir, do you have a release from the hospital?" The man replied that he did not know he needed one. Upon further questioning, it turned out he had just been discharged from the hospital that morning after recovering from COVID-19. He was yelling, and the agent was standing firm, stating, "You are not getting on this plane and risking everyone's health." Thankfully, the police arrived and took him away while he made threats in several languages. The frazzled agent then called me over, as everyone was already on the plane by that time. She thanked me for waiting patiently and said she had a nice seat for me. As I walked down the aisle and looked at my seat, I was shocked to find out it was in business class, across the Atlantic. Since bad weather had made me miss my original flight, it was a sweet reward. Story 19. Many years ago, I was on a Boeing 747 flight in the United States, domestic, and I was in the aisle seat napping. My hand was hanging into the aisle a bit, and I woke up when something brushed by my arm. A black cat was casually sauntering down the aisle toward the front of the plane. Story 20. People watch near Spirit Airlines and you will see some unfathomably trashy behavior. I watched a woman throw a tantrum at a gate and get arrested. It was quite an experience. Story 21. A female teenager in a handstand against the staircase from check-in to security check was shaking her rear. I have always thought of that behavior to be kind of silly and not really appealing or attractive, but in the middle of a busy airport, it seemed strange. Story 22. When I worked at the airport, a lady who was flying to Spain to spend the winter in her second home had decided to bring her pet parrot with her. Rather than transporting it the safe and legal way, she sedated it and put it in a potato chip can with air holes punched in it. Security spotted it coming through the scanner in her hand luggage. Story 23. Walking by an open hangar at San Luis Obispo Airport, I did a double take because one of the Red Bull Planeswap 182s and the Rutan Boomerang were parked side by side. Story 24. Burbank Airport, about 5 years ago. Chick fast asleep with a satin eye mask, sprawled out on a queen-sized inflatable bed complete with sheets, a blanket, a comforter, and a pillow. The bed was in a hall approaching the Transportation Security Administration and plugged in. Nice, clean, high-end looking stuff. Story 25. I live in Los Angeles, so I have seen celebrities a few times as I travel through Los Angeles International Airport. But the best one was when I saw flamboyant comedian Rip Taylor at the baggage pickup area. We walked out of the terminal into the parking lot and happened to be parked near him. His license plate said confetti. Story 26. The guy in front of me, let's just say his name is Peter, is in scrubs, and the X-ray of his bag raises suspicion. The Transportation Security Administration agent asks his supervisor to help identify something on the screen, but they can't tell what it is. So the bag is pulled for a manual search. Fortunately, I get to watch due to the X-ray operator being very new and very slow. Pretty normal looking suitcase and normal contents. I noticed shirts, shoes, a shaving kit, and some weird looking bandages. I figured that was okay because Peter is in scrubs. Then the Transportation Security Administration supervisor asks if he can further check into a smaller light blue case. This case was about the size of a nice headphone case. Peter said yes with a slight chuckle. The case was unzipped, and the Transportation Security Administration supervisor looked perplexed about what he was seeing. So, Peter tells him it's a training aid. I assumed it was a training aid and not something inappropriate. I laughed out loud, and so did Vagina Pete. The Transportation Security Administration agent just smiled awkwardly as he swabbed the silicone item for explosive residue. Yes, he swabbed top to bottom more than once. All was packed up and we all went our separate ways. Story 27. The Transportation Security Administration had to drag a belligerent man off an airplane. The airplane wasn't ready to board yet. He ran onto an empty plane because he thought the Transportation Security Administration agents wouldn't follow him in. The reason he was upset was that his flight got delayed by 15 minutes. Additionally, the flight was delayed another 20 minutes because of him. Story 28. A group of grown women, including some larger women, was filming themselves dancing. They were climbing on furniture, spreading out, and cheering as if they were in a club. This was around 8 in the evening, and there were people all around in the terminal. They took turns trying to outdo each other. It was one of the most ridiculous things I had ever seen. It was quite obnoxious. Perhaps they had a few too many drinks. Story 29. The airport itself. I never thought I would be able to afford a flight, but after saving up for years, I could afford a 45-minute flight to Denver. It was very fun. Story 30. I was on a plane with Susan from Sesame Street. She could tell that I knew who she was, and she advised her seatmates not to ask unless they wanted every kid on the plane to line up and visit. She was dressed beautifully. Story 31. I should add some detail. This was in Denver in the early 2000s. I had a layover and was walking through the terminal when there was a minor commotion outside the men's restroom. A couple of guys were loudly talking and laughing, and one was saying he was going back in to try to get a picture. There was some more minor commotion from inside. A few seconds later, Ron Jeremy came walking out, pulling his rolling carry-on, just going on his way like everyone else. I eventually pieced together from the loud guy's conversation that one guy had been at the urinal and looked over to see Ron Jeremy. The commotion involved various guys recognizing him and saying, "Hey, Ron!" I don't know if they were high-fiving him, asking for autographs, or taking a selfie. What do you do when you see a porn star with a legendary reputation at the urinal? Story 32. Once, before September 11th, while leaving London and going through security, I had a load of new woodworking tools in my carry-on. I had a tenon saw, many chisels, and other sharp items. I was waved through at the X-ray machine. My wife, accompanying me, was asked to open her bags, which contained dirty clothes. As the bag opened, her clothes literally ejected themselves over the security officer. Story 33. A full-size Barney the dinosaur with a plain captain's hat. My family was at the airport very early in the morning, and it was pretty empty. Apparently, they were filming some tourism promotion. The actor was nice enough to come over and say hello to us kids in character. It's a weird fever dream of a memory. I was probably 12 at the time, but my younger brothers were very excited. Story 34. Half an ounce of cannabis in my sock, brought through international security. This was 20 years ago, but still post-September 11th. Story 35. I was on board a flight ready to take off, just getting dark around 6 to 7 p.m. Right before the plane got on the main runway, there was a total power outage where everything turned off and it was pitch black. All of a sudden, Somebody in the back of the plane yelled, "Captain, we have lost power." Everyone burst out laughing. I and two others got off the plane. About half an hour later, I saw the rest deboarding right on the runway. Story 36. A man in a full suit eating an onion as if it were an apple. No hesitation. No tears. Just raw onion confidence. Story 37. It is nothing too weird, although I have traveled a fair bit. There is one funny moment I remember. My husband and I were flying somewhere with a bunch of layovers. Suddenly, he saw a woman walking past in a completely see-through, nude top without a bra at the airport. Her breasts were very exposed, and the majority of men's eyes were glued to her, including my husband's, and he did not even try to hide it. Instead, he loudly exclaimed to me, "Did you see that? She does not wear a bra." I briefly looked at her and continued walking without having a single thought. Only later did I realize that I was so exhausted at that moment that I could not care less even if every single passenger walked naked past me. This is how tired I was. Then it made me laugh and a bit sad at the same time. This is what it feels like after 20 years of marriage. There was no single thought of jealousy from my side towards my husband. It would be a different story 10 to 15 years ago. Story 38. I saw people sleeping on the dirty carpeting at the airport in Las Vegas, too hungover or drunk and broke to care. Story 39. I was at Istanbul Sabiha Gökçen International Airport a day or so after it opened in January 2000. It says 2001 in Wikipedia, but I think that is incorrect. A drunk middle-aged Turkish man somehow made it to the international departure gate where I was and tried to bribe the gate agent to let him on a flight by offering his half-consumed bottle of whiskey. It did not work. Story 40. A woman was screaming that she didn't need to wear a mask during COVID. She was taken out of the airport by security. Oh, she had a cat on a leash that relieved itself right there in the terminal. Story 41. 3 men sitting at a Costa in Edinburgh. 3 random men, with a 2-table-sized Dungeons and Dragons board. It actually took up 2 tables. It had at least 200 to 300 pieces, and they were there for about 2.5 hours. They had goblins, castles, and horses. The whole experience was quite intense. They were well invested in this complex game. My mother and I were playing Uno next to them. Story 42. I flew from Los Angeles International Airport to Sydney in late September 2001. The security was tight. For some reason, the power went out and the entire building went on lockdown. Soldiers brandishing assault rifles running around was completely terrifying. Story 43. Miami has driverless wheelchairs that take passengers to their gates and return home unaided. It's quite unusual. Story 44. When I went to return a hire car to Johannesburg International Airport during COVID, I was the only person in the entire airport. No security, no staff, no passengers, nothing at all. Although I'm sure someone must have been there, I didn't see a single human being. I walked through the entire domestic and international terminals looking for information from any human being. My footsteps echoed for about half an hour. I eventually found a K9 unit officer in one of the car parks who lowered a barrier so I could drop the car off. I was terrified we would scare each other, but he was calm. Story 45. I was in line to board the plane when a random guy asked me if it was the flight to Toronto. I was too dumbfounded to answer anything other than no, because we were in Toronto. Story 46. 5 people with fake passports were being escorted away from the line I was standing in by armed police. This was in Dusseldorf 7 or 8 years ago. Story 47. I have heard that when something unusual is happening at the airport or there are people dressed in strange clothing and acting out, they are paid to do that to distract you from a famous person coming through the airport. So next time you see something unusual, do not focus on the oddity. Instead, look around for the famous person. Story 48. A man with a poorly drawn tiger tattoo on his calf was trying to check in a large box, about the size of a slightly shorter refrigerator. After the second worker failed to assist him and he was waiting for a third, he turned to us and said that he would be a while, and it would be better to change the queue. Story 49. I got dropped off at Salt Lake City Airport in around 2014. The driver called for a wheelchair to help get me through the airport due to my broken knee, but it never arrived at the drop-off area. There was no security visible, so I was trying to hobble into the building on crutches while pulling a suitcase behind me. A European girl stopped me and asked if she could take a picture with me. I vaguely recall her pulling my suitcase into the building while I followed. As soon as we found someone who could call for assistance to get me through the airport, she disappeared, and I never saw her again. Story 50. A couple of years before September 11th, I was waiting in the United Terminal at O'Hare, waiting to fly to Las Vegas. A group of people took out musical instruments and started playing music. A couple was singing in a language I was unfamiliar with and dancing, while a few guys were filming the whole scene. All of these people appeared to be of South Asian descent, and I figured I might have witnessed an impromptu Bollywood movie being filmed. Several uniformed Chicago police officers were standing around and were not attempting to shut down the filming, so I assumed they had the proper permits. Story 51. A woman casually chats on the phone while clipping her toenails. She then uses one of her flip-flops to push all the nail clippings under her chair to hide them. Story 52. The man in front of me was required to remove his eye. He had a painted eye, and the guard suspected he had something hidden there from what I understood. Took me a few days to recover from that experience. Story 53. A guy in front of me went through the metal detector. It beeped. He just goes, "Oh," drops his pants, and is butt naked. He pulls out a butt plug, puts it in one of those trays, goes through again, still naked by the way, takes the plug again, puts it in his pants, and just goes like this was a totally normal thing. Me and the guy patting people down just stare at each other. Story 54. As a naive newcomer at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in 1985, on my way to Fort Sill, I was approached right out in the open by a man offering what seemed to be a variety of drugs from the inside of his overcoat. He made no effort to be discreet. Story 55. 12th grade. My girlfriend's dad drives us to the airport as she is leaving overseas for a week. I go into the bathroom at Detroit Metro, where there is a literal wall of urinals, at least 20. I go near the end. Her dad stands right up next to me. Story 56. Not even a month after September 11th, I took my toddler to pick up my husband at the airport after his return from a group hunting trip to Newfoundland, Canada. Heightened security was everywhere, with officials looking like they were just waiting for an excuse to arrest someone. The older man in the group was nose-to-nose with the airport representative about where his guns were. They flew his baggage, but with the border crossing. Where his coolers of game meat were, they ended up in New Orleans. God bless the staff there for getting them back up to Wisconsin within 24 hours before they thawed out. And didn't they know he was an American and had rights, etc. The minute my husband saw us, he grabbed us and took off running for the car. He didn't want to be a part of that situation. Story 57. My mom once told me that she saw a mother making out with someone who looked like her son at the airport. Story 58. A bodybuilder was ripping off his clothes like the Hulk and crying that he didn't want to go to Amsterdam. He wanted to go to America. All the while, a young woman tried to comfort him. This was in Budapest or Bucharest. I can't remember which one. Story 59. A Japanese man is engaging in inappropriate behavior underneath his coat while waiting to board a flight to Tokyo. My girlfriend noticed this because we were sitting very close to him, and the entire boarding section for the Tokyo flight was crowded, leaving us with nowhere else to go. This incident took place at the airport in Abu Dhabi, where the local airport police resemble stormtroopers. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't witnessed it firsthand. This occurred in 2015. Story 60. A nice young woman and her dog, which had no front legs, were riding a motorized skateboard. I do not usually do a double take, but Story 61. In the 1990s, Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport took my curling iron out of my bag at customs. They looked it over, passed it from person to person, and then confiscated it because they said it resembled a pipe bomb. It was just a generic Conair curling iron. I bought the expensive power converter for nothing. Story 62. A lady was trying to smuggle her dog onto the plane. It started barking inside her backpack. Then she began a fistfight with security over the dog. Story 63. I saw a woman in her pajamas, not comfortable clothes, who appeared to have slept in stained sleepwear. She took off her shoes while waiting for her flight and walked around barefoot all over the airport. She had a large number of medications with her that the Transportation Security Administration inspected in a big clear bag. Apparently, she did not like the way they arranged them, so she took each bottle out one by one and dumped all the pills together into the bag. Then she was just walking around with a giant clear bag of medication. Story 64. A sign that said, "Do not feed the cats." There were indeed several cats roaming around the open-air terminal in Koh Samui, Thailand. I also got whisked onto a golf cart, taken away from the terminal, and deposited in a small room for questioning. They asked if the worn red suitcase was mine. It was. My aerosol can of hairspray caused alarm. They asked me why I had it. For my hair? They conferred for a moment and sent me back on the golf cart. Cats and free golf cart rides make the Koh Samui Airport an A+ in my book. Story 65. A big bottle of contact lens solution was discarded past security. It was like a big water bottle when I thought security only allows 3 ounces maximum. Story 66. Men with 4-foot cane batons were driving back the crowd from people who had just landed and wanted taxis. Story 67. I don't remember the airport. I think it was Dallas-Fort Worth or Dulles. But it was within the last year seeing what I am assuming were homeless people begging for money inside the terminal. Story 68. A guy is fully asleep on the floor, using his suitcase as a pillow. Respect the hustle, but also, sir, are you okay? Story 69. A drunk man was trying to fight a sober man. It turned out that the drunk man had tried to chat up and then touch the sober man's wife. Security rushed over, and the drunk man proceeded to run off, hiding in various stores. When they cornered him outside W.H. Smith, he began to strip off his clothes. He then lay down and refused to move, so security set up screens around him until the police arrived and took him away. I guess having armed police pointing guns at you sobers you up quite quickly. Story 70. In the mid-2000s at Sydney Airport, a Middle Eastern woman in a burqa, carrying multiple Ziploc bags full of roll-on deodorants, was trying to hand them to people in the security queue to take them through for her. Story 71. A woman in a full teddy bear onesie, complete with a hood that had bare ears, was strolling very slowly in the airport in Munich. Story 72. The drug dog was sniffing carry-on bags at the gate and got distracted by my cheeseburger. The handler was very upset with the dog for losing its focus. Story 73. A woman in a wheelchair was eating caramel corn and getting pre-boarding. Then she beat us to baggage claim on the other end. It was a miracle. Story 74. A drug bust. I was in 6th grade, I think, and on a vacation with my dad with a flight connecting through Cincinnati. The police came around the corner. A man tried to stealthily place his small duffel bag into a trash can, and they were definitely already onto him before he could dump the duffel. My dad ushered me away as the airport police put the man in handcuffs. Story 75. A man is going birdwatching. He is dressed in camouflage with a vest and is using binoculars to observe women walking down the concourse. Story 76. No lines anywhere. It was empty with only minimal staff. This happened at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport early last December before the end-of-year holiday rush. It was amazing. Story 77. I had a flight delayed because the air seal had to be replaced around the door. The announcer told us that we had to wait 45 minutes for the glue to dry. Story 78. My wife and I were waiting at the departure gate for her daughter's plane to take off. The doors of the plane were already closed, and they were just finishing up loading baggage. A loud, obnoxious woman and her embarrassed-looking husband barged up to the ticket counter and demanded to get on the plane, even though she was obviously very late. This rude and overbearing woman was making a scene about how she was going to get on that plane because she had a ticket and she was going. After a lot of arguing and the ticket agent telling her the plane was ready to take off, the woman still persisted. Finally, the ticket agent told the woman that the plane was already overweight and overloaded, so she wouldn't be able to board anyway. Without missing a beat, the woman told the ticket agent that he better throw some overweight people off of that plane because she was getting on one way or another. I was standing right beside this horrible person, and I was flabbergasted by how rude insensitive, and entitled she was. What made it all worse was that she actually got onto the plane, so her behavior worked for her. My wife still brings up that incident from time to time and is still astonished by it. Story 79. My husband and I saw about 20 little people decked out in Western gear, 10-gallon hats, Western boots, and fringed tops striding down the walkway at O'Hare. Story 80. Newark right before Christmas. Some Arab sheik with all his wives and about 20 children. Robes, turban, and all. The only thing missing was camels and a tent. Story 81. I am at Los Angeles International Airport waiting for my flight when I see a guy strolling through security with a full rotisserie chicken. No bag, no container, just bare hands gripping it like a football. The Transportation Security Administration doesn't even flinch. He sets it in a bin, watches it glide through the scanner, then picks it up on the other side like it is his emotional support bird. No napkins, no hesitation, just straight up bites into it while walking to his gate. Story 82. Some individual had an unfortunate incident during a booked 5.5-hour flight. He brought alcohol aboard and was evidently consuming it. Quite a lot of it. Once we disembarked, it was obvious why the crew kept reminding us not to drink any alcohol we had brought on board. The individual was heavily intoxicated. He could hardly walk, dropped his carry-on at the top of an escalator, and it fell to the bottom, where it struggled to stay in place on the stair and continued to tumble. Like a cartoon, the intoxicated individual kept trying to descend the escalator to retrieve it. The next person to reach the escalator had to grab it and return it to him. The intoxicated individual walked past me, headed to the restroom. He had a noticeable odor. I felt bad for the people next to him. This was a flight over an ocean, so there was no possibility of an emergency landing. Story 83. I saw a man on a flight with an African gray parrot on his shoulder. Apparently, it was a service animal because they allowed him on the plane with it. Nobody wanted to sit near him because his entire back was covered in white from the parrot freely pooping on him. Story 84. Going through security countless times, I cannot have a cigarette lighter in my bag, but having one in my pocket is acceptable? Story 85. At Heathrow, United Kingdom, I observed an airport employee on the floor assisting numerous passengers in finding their way to their gates. Many took the opportunity to receive quick guidance. Then he turned around and walked toward the restrooms, and on his back it said restroom technician. He made his job more satisfying. Story 86. A man was told his bag was too heavy for the flight, so he started pulling items out of the bag and putting them on himself and his child. It was reminiscent of that time in the television show Friends when Joey wore all of Chandler's clothes, despite the staff trying to explain that this approach would not resolve the issue. I have no idea how the situation ended. Story 87. Poop. Not in the toilet. On the floor of the departure lounge. It was being cleaned up by staff. I didn't see who did it. Story 88. A 20-something partygoer going through security at Manchester wearing a thong, grass skirt, and coconut bra with flip-flops. At 5 a.m., everyone was looking around as if to say, "Am I hallucinating this? What is real anymore?" Oddly, it didn't faze anyone in security. I guess they see things like this. Story 89. In September of 2001, I was a child flying alone to visit one of my parents. And in the airport, guess what I saw? A soldier in full gear wielding a big old M16, just guarding the front. Flying as an unaccompanied minor in the wake of September 11th was an interesting experience. Story 90. Met this guy once at O'Hare, Paul Carson. Story 91. Flying out of Fort Lauderdale, possibly Miami, Florida for sure. Someone on the Southwest team at our desk was moving or got a promotion or something, so they were celebrating, I guess. It was confusing. They had a speaker and karaoke machine, dance contests, and a karaoke contest, all with passengers. They were giving away promotional items and legitimate flight credits. This was after a Carnival cruise, so as you can imagine, the people were something else. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen in an airport. Story 92. I was reading a book and waiting for my connecting flight at Chicago O'Hare. A seat opened up across from me and a man walked up with his suitcase. Put it down. and said something in a foreign language while gesturing towards the bag as if to say, "Will you watch this?" Then he walked away. We all ignored him. This was shortly after the events of September 11th, and those incessant reminders about not leaving bags unattended were being announced every minute or two. Without skipping a beat, once the man walked away, someone walked by and took the bag. I immediately got up and moved to another area because I did not want to sit around for that situation to unfold. Part of me does wonder what happened, though. Story 93. Nothing weird, but two unusual things spring to mind. I think I was in Chicago and I could hear this odd clacking. Someone was walking clearly. A lady finally came into sight, dressed fairly stylishly, but wearing Japanese wooden clogs with the wooden slat. I think I can't quite remember, but it was the type where you balance on a single wooden cleat on the bottom. The second was in Orlando right after the Electronic Dance Music Festival last year. A girl in line in front of me had short pirate boots with the tops folded down. She wore boots, shorts, a cowboy hat, and a backless halter top. Basically, it was a piece of cloth over her chest held up by string. It was memorable. She definitely wasn't going to overheat on the flight back to wherever she was going. Story 94. Someone was shaving in the queue for check-in. Luckily, it was just his face that he was shaving, but still. Story 95. A few years ago, I was flying from El Prat Airport in Barcelona. I was minding my own business, having a glass of wine, as is my custom in airports, when I overheard a young woman shouting at a man. I looked over and saw her pushing him away and storming off, shouting things to him that made me understand that he had been following her around the airport and creeping on her. That was the weirdest thing I have seen. Story 96. What I can only describe as some sort of wizard, probably some kind of religious outfit, but it certainly looked like a wizard. Story 97. I was at a gate waiting to leave when a member of the cleaning staff started washing some seats. A windowsill, a garbage can, the check-in counter, and the telephone without dipping the rag once. It was very disgusting. Story 98. I was in the executive offices at our local airport. They are not anything fancy, but it is where the items taken by the Transportation Security Administration are sorted to be donated. In the pile of items that could not be donated were 8 2-inch diameter by 28-inch fireworks or sparkler devices that a lady tried to take as a carry-on. She was a dancer and it was part of her act. She apparently asked to check them and was quite upset that she could not fly with them. Story 99. Very fat, very drunk Russian man lying down on a travelator, unable to get up as he was positioned at an angle across it. Story 100. 3 different times, 3 different men took all their clothes off. I mean, completely naked. 2 were having mental breakdowns. The third was angry that he missed his flight. Story 101. A woman went through security wearing a cut-off shirt and electrical tape over her nipples. Yes, she flew with Spirit Airlines, as did I. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.